Welcome to Touchline Talk by Soccerspective. I'm your host, Brandon Faust, where we dive deep into the success and tactics of the global game's greatest manager. And today we're talking about José Mourinho and his masterclass of how FC Porto shocked Europe in 2003-2004 in the Champions League. Here are some unique and lesser-known facts about FC Porto's 2003-2004 UEFA Champions League winning season under José Mourinho. Did you know that Porto spent less than $10 million on their squad? Unlike today's super clubs, Porto won the Champions League with a squad built on a shoestring budget. Most of their key players, Deco, Ricardo Carvalho, Maniche, Castilla, were either youth products, free signings, or low-cost transfers. In contrast, their final opponents, Monaco, had some big money players like Fernando Morientes on loan from Real Madrid. Mourinho used 5 different tactical systems in their rise to success in the Champions League. Throughout the campaign, Mourinho didn't just stick to one formation. It kept them unpredictable. He adapted his setup based on the opponent, shifting between a 4-3-1-2 with a diamond midfield and Deco as the playmaker, a 4-3-3 with a wider setup to stretch defenses when they'd go on the counterattack, a 4-4-2 diamond for better midfield control, a 5-3-2 like against a strong attacking team when they faced Manchester United, and a 4-5-1 in the final, which allowed Deco to pull the strings and for Porto to assert themselves in midfield. Porto had an unbeaten home record in the Champions League. They did not lose a single home game at the Estadio do Dragão throughout the tournament. They won 4 out of 5 home games, only drawing against the powerhouse that is Real Madrid in the group stage. Mourinho's touchline sprint versus Manchester United was a defining moment, an iconic moment after knocking out Manchester United in the round of 16. With a late goal from Castilla, Mourinho sprinted down the Old Trafford touchline to celebrate. And that moment really symbolized his rise as a top-tier manager. In those days, nobody was beating a Fergie-led Manchester United team, and is still one of the most iconic Champions League celebrations ever. Porto also secured having the second-best defense in the tournament. They only conceded 8 goals in 13 matches in Champions League competition, an elite defensive record. They kept 7 clean sheets, including against Deportivo La Coruña in the semifinals, and then again against Monaco in the final. Deco was involved in more goals than any other player in the knockout stage. Deco was the creative heartbeat of Porto's attack. Obviously, he had great success as a player at Barcelona as well. He scored 2 goals and assisted 4 more in the knockout rounds, and his performance in the final earned him the UEFA Man of the Match award. Porto also became the last non-top 5 league club to win the Champions League. Since Porto's win in 2004, no club from outside England, Spain, Germany, Italy, or France has won the Champions League, and their victory is still considered one of the greatest underdog triumphs in modern football history. José Mourinho was the youngest manager to win the Champions League in over a decade. At 41 years old, Mourinho became the youngest manager to win the Champions League final since Johan Cruyff in 1992, and his coaching career skyrocketed immediately afterwards as he joined Chelsea the very next season. Porto not only had a great defensive record, but they scored in every single knockout match. Porto didn't go scoreless in any knockout match, an incredible consistency for an underdog team, and they always found a way to score. Even against defensive teams like Deportivo La Coruña, they found a way. Porto had a plus 11 goal difference in the knockout rounds alone. Despite being underdogs, Porto dominated in the knockout runs in the round of 16, defeating Manchester United 3-2 on aggregate. The quarterfinals beat Lyon 4-2 on aggregate, and in the semifinals beat Deportivo La Coruña 1-0 on aggregate, and then in the final beating Monaco, surprisingly blanking them 3-0. Ricardo Carvalho was the unsung hero of the tournament. While Deco got a lot of the headlines as the one who pulled the strings, Carvalho was an absolute defensive rock. He made crucial clearances against Manchester United, Lyon, and Monaco, and his performances earned him a move to Chelsea, along with José Mourinho later that summer. And Porto had one of the lowest average possession stats of any Champions League winner. Unlike modern teams that often have to dominate possession to win, Porto played a counter-attacking style. They invited the pressure on, would hit on the break, and they had less than 50% possession in most of their games, but were incredibly efficient with their chances and scoring opportunities. And today we dive into one of the greatest tactical masterclasses in football history. José Mourinho leading Porto to the 2004 Champions League title. And why this win was so historic. Porto were underdogs. No one expected them to win. Mourinho announces himself on the scene of global football as a top-tier manager, and it set the foundation for his future success at Chelsea, Inter Milan, and beyond. So how did Mourinho tactically outclass Europe's elite at such a young age? And what can you as a coach at any level, as a youth coach, college coach, high school coach, learn from this triumph? Mourinho's tactical genius at Porto. Formation and style of play. He played often that 4-3-1-2 or a 4-3-3 hybrid system, adapted depending on the opponent. Compact, defensively solid, and disciplined, but lethal. In any formation they'd set up in, they'd invite some of the pressure and then counterattack in moments. They'd pick their pockets to try and go and win the match. They relied on an aggressive press, fast transitions, and smart positional play. They had defensive solidity, one of the best defensive units in the competition. Carvalho and Jorge Costa marshaled the back line. Fullbacks played conservatively and had a defense-first approach. I know in the modern game, you often see these outside backs function more like wing backs and become as like a secondary winger in the attack. In this Mourinho setup, it's not that they wouldn't get forward, but it was a defensive-first approach. Be solid at the back before anything else. And then there was midfield control. Deco as the playmaker, pulling the strings, dictating the tempo. Maniche and Castilla as a double pivot, pressing and breaking up attacks. And then the attacking strategy, playing quick vertical passes to exploit defensive weaknesses. McCarthy and Derlei as a fluid forward partnership, and relied on set pieces and counterattacks for goals. The road to the Champions League final. In the group stage, Porto dominated their group, only losing once. Mourinho showed adaptability, switching tactics based on these opponents. When they played Manchester United in the round of 16, that key moment, Porto wins 2-1 at home, and then a late goal at Old Trafford by Castilla in stoppage time seals the 1-1 draw to see them through and win. Even though it was a draw, it was celebrated as a win because they won on aggregate to advance to the next round. In this setup against Manchester United, Mourinho had FC Porto sit deep, invite pressure, and then pick their pockets for counterattacking. Classic Mourinho, us versus the world mentality, told his players they belonged on this stage. And in the aftermath, Mourinho's famous sprint down the touchline celebrating with Sir Alex Ferguson and Old Trafford in the background. Porto versus Lyon in the quarterfinals. Key moment here, Porto wins 4-2 on aggregate, showcasing their attacking strength. Mourinho allowed Deco more creative freedom, leading to Porto's dominance in midfield, and then use those fullbacks to press high on Lyon's wide players, cutting off supply lines. So they kind of played with a higher defensive line and neutralize exactly what Lyon typically would do to succeed in a match. And then Porto versus Deportivo La Coruña in the semifinals. They won 1-0 over 2 legs. It was a defensive masterclass. Sat deep, absorbed pressure, then attacked in controlled bursts, stifled Deportivo's attack, proving Porto could win ugly and pragmatically once again when needed. Then to the final, the 2004 Champions League final, FC Porto versus Monaco. Porto wins 3-0, right? The single fixture, these other ones, on aggregate, single fixture here, won 3-0. Monaco starts aggressively, but Porto's structure was just unbreakable. Mourinho allowed Monaco possession, but controlled key spaces defensively that they could not penetrate. And once Porto scored first from Carlos Alberto, the game was over. Mourinho's teams don't lose leads. This played right into their hand. Deco ran the show, scoring a beautiful second goal, and then a late counterattack sealed the win to get it 3-0. And maybe what you don't know at this time or have forgotten is that Monaco was coached by Didier Deschamps, who's had a lot of success with the French national team. Monaco were an attacking team, but left too many spaces in behind, that those counterattacks, those diagonal-type balls that Mourinho teams love to play on the break with, and exploited their lack of defensive structure with these fast counterattacks, showed elite game management through subbing, formation tweaks, time-wasting strategies. After this incredible upset, beautiful run in the Champions League, kind of an all-time upset sort of tournament Cinderella story for FC Porto, Mourinho leaves Porto right after the final, joins Chelsea as the manager, and his coaching philosophy from Porto carries into Chelsea, Inter Milan, and beyond. And really what I think we can take from this run, I know José Mourinho can be a fairly polarizing figure for many, but it was true that, and this has been true of a lot of his teams, and sometimes it's short-lived and sometimes it lasts for a duration, that organization beats talent if executed correctly. Porto may have been outmatched man for man, but they don't get me wrong, they had some talent. They had the likes of Carvalho and Deco on that squad. But organization, a belief in what we're going to do, this is how we beat talent, is we're going to play our system, we're going to execute our plan better than they can execute their plan. And then that psychological edge. Mourinho made Porto believe they were unbeatable. He made them believe that they couldn't be penetrated defensively. And then defensive structure can win you titles. You don't need to dominate possession to win. I know a lot of people think you need to have 70% of the ball to be able to create meaningful chances or enough chances. You can have 30, 40% of the ball and you get the right 3-4 opportunities and put 2 of them away, and then you're set up to play defensively already. You're comfortable with that. Your team's trained for that, has that mentality for that, and it played right into the style Mourinho wanted to play. And counterattacks are deadly when executed with precision, right? That you're sitting off the game a bit, and then maybe the opponent is falling asleep at the back a little bit, or thinks that they can get a little more advanced because they've had so much of the ball. Nice, precise, diagonal ball on the ground or over top. And that's exactly what this FC Porto team did. Now, Mourinho's 2004 Porto team, it was built on discipline, counterattacks, and belief. And so there's this question that's often brought around as, where does this rank amongst the greatest Champions League wins, right? We've had times where we see some squads, win a few Champions Leagues in a few years. We've seen all kinds of squads, where a team, even recently Manchester City with the treble. But where does this rank amongst the greatest Champions League wins? I think from an underdog perspective, it's number 1 or number 2 in my book. As such a great upset, a great run. And at that time, to knock off that Manchester United side was unprecedented, right? Unheard of. And then to come in against a Monaco team that was a little more flashy, a little bit more offensive-minded. It was kind of a war of philosophies and styles, and that Mourinho came out on top. And then the question that I think is interesting too is, would Mourinho's 2004 tactics work in today's game? I know he's tried them at different places. He's been at Tottenham. He had been, he's now coaching in Turkey. He's been at, Manchester United, right? There's all kinds of places he stopped, and it's maybe will work for a season. Maybe it doesn't work at all. There's a totally different pragmatism, belief system than we see oftentimes in the era of Pep or Klopp or Arne Slot or those kind of styles. So it would be interesting to see, if we could see a team go on a Champions League run like this with a shoestring budget relative to the competition. I think the modern game has changed quite a bit, but I do think Mourinho was just enough ahead of his time on inviting pressure on and then playing a counter-attacking style. And so José Mourinho, an enigma, the special one. I think oftentimes people forget that he won a Champions League with Inter Milan as well. quietly, won at Inter. And, he's had a very polarizing career. I think even watching if you've never seen it before on Amazon, they have kind of like the behind the scenes of the Tottenham Hotspur and his season there. One of the seasons there, which was fascinating. So yeah, he's an interesting coach to study, and I would encourage you, even if you stylistically play different, to take some of these principles from Mourinho, because there are going to be matches at a youth level, any level, where you're going to need to, maybe you've got a player who's sick or injured, maybe you've got a lead and your team has not had a lot of experience sitting on a 1-0 or a 2-0 lead. I think we can take a lot of these principles from Mourinho of how to understand and adequately evaluate your talent, how to help people pick their pockets to play counterattacking. You don't just want to play boom ball and kick it up there. That's not what was happening. They were playing direct counterattacking football. And to set up with defensive solidity, right? I think everybody wants to get forward. Everybody wants to get the wing backs up into attack. But there's something to be said. If you're solid at the back and don't concede goals, it's hard to lose if you're not conceding any goals. And so I think there's some practical takeaways for you as a fan, as a coach, whether at the youth level, college level, or something in between, to be thinking about as you approach your team, your philosophy developing, your ideology as a coach. And that's what we've seen with Mourinho. He's doubled down on his way. And I think he's allowed teams, when he's had success, he allows certain players like a Deco to have those matches, those games where they can get forward, where they can influence and pull the strings. But as a collective unit to say, this is what we do, this is how we're going to play, you're either bought into it or you're not. So we want to say thanks for joining in on this episode of Touchline Talk by Soccer Spective. We're excited to be bringing you more and more spotlights on global managers, as well as some interviews coming up in the coming weeks ahead to get an inside look at not just the managerial side, but also some of the behind-the-scenes world of global football. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Touchline Talk. We hope that you like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.